Okay. And just to recap a little bit of what's been going on, the discussion is about the difference between Shabbat and Yom Kippur in a very, very specific, very narrow topic, and that is with regard to punishing infractions against either Shabbat or Yom Kippur. The Mishnah says there's no difference between the two of them, except that the deliberate desecration of this one is punishable by human beings, and the deliberate desecration of the other, meaning Yom Kippur, is done by God, by heaven, and not by human beings. And that's the idea of karet, which whatever that means. It's some kind of heavenly retribution. We don't have to go into it right now, but that's a response by God. While when it comes to Shabbat, theoretically, it's up to the human court to punish the person who has transgressed Shabbat, if it's on purpose and with all of the rules. How come I don't see where it is? And with all of the rules are followed, that person gets put to death. So here we have the distinction between karet and putting someone to death. And then the Gemara has a discussion. Wait, sorry. Okay, everybody's in. How does the Gemara makes a point of saying the Mishnah seems to say this is the only difference with regard to punishment, and therefore that means that the rule that we apply in terms of human punishment, that the greatest human punishment is applied, and that one human punishment then erases all other obligations. So paying for the damages that you might cause while you have desecrated Shabbat, that payment obligation is thrown out because you're going to be put to death, and that's enough. So I had a whole, I gave a whole discussion about that. How does that, what does that mean in terms of the person who's at a loss here? Do they have some kind of ultimate monetary claim or not? We're not going to go into that again. But now our Gemara is still trying to figure out, hold on, how come I hear these rings but I don't have to do anything? Good. The Gemara is still trying to figure out this Mishnah, whose opinion does it follow? So the first thing it said was that it follows Nechunya ben Hakana, because Nechunya ben Hakana says that if you get karet by heaven, if that's the punishment that is administered to you by heaven, then nevertheless, even though we're not doing it, we are now taken off the hook, and we do not administer the enforcement of paying your monetary debts. So that's Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana's point. That seems to be reflected in the Mishnah. Okay, then just to back up a little bit, we read it last time. We're going to read it again. Okay, and we're going to start from the last three lines on the left-hand column on 7b4, where well, actually, you know what? I would appreciate it if we actually went back a little bit more. So let's do from the Gemara comments on this Mishnah. So it's about 6-7 lines from the top on 7b4. We'll read this a little quickly. Who's going to read for us? Beryl, here we go.
The Gemara comments on this Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rav Hanania ben Gamliel colleagues disagree with him. The Gemara seeks to confirm Rav Yochanan's statement from our Mishnah. Rava said, they said in the school of Rav that Rav Yochanan's statement that others disagree with Rav Hanania ben Gamliel may be proven from this Mishnah. There is no difference between the Sabbath and Yom Kippur, except that the deliberate desecration of this one Sabbath is punishable by human authority, and the deliberate desecration of the other, Yom Kippur, is punishable with karet. Now, if it is so that receiving lashes from the courts exempts one from karet, as Rav Hanania ben Gamliel holds, then both this Sabbath and the other, Yom Kippur, are punishable by human authority. The Sabbath desecrated by death, and the Yom Kippur desecrated by flogging, which absolves him from karet.
So this claim that Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel makes touches on the point that we were discussing last time. Hanania ben Gamliel makes this claim. He bases it also on scriptural discussions. This whole thing is found mostly in Tractate Makot. He says that even though you're punished with karet, which is administered by God whenever God sees fit and however God sees fit, whatever that means, it's God's business. Nevertheless, if you are given lashes by the court for this crime, which is punishable by heaven, if the court does get involved, then that court administered punishment will clear you of the punishment of karet, which is a very astounding statement. What it says is that even though God says, leave it to me, I'm going to take care of this hombre, this bad hombre. Nevertheless, if the court steps in and administers a punishment, God will be satisfied. Then that punishment is enough, and God won't further inflict on this person the punishment of karet. And as I said, this is deduced from reading Torah. You'll have to look it up in Makot. But what Rabbi Yochanan says is not everybody agrees with that. There's something here wrong with my thing here. Sorry. Okay. So that's the claim. And then Rabbi Yochanan says not everybody agrees. Right? His colleagues don't agree with Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel, and they say no, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to heaven what is heaven's. And if heaven has decided that something should be punished with karet, then we can't do anything about it. It doesn't matter what we punish. That's not going to take away the heavenly punishment. So now, just as a side point, what we see in our Mishnah, again, the Gemara is trying to be very, very close reading, give a close reading of the Mishnah. There's no difference, but you're saying that one is administered by heaven and one is administered by human beings. If we agreed with Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel, then even the Yom Kippur punishments could be administered by human beings, because we could administer lashes and get the person off the hook from the karet. So clearly our Mishnah is one of the statements that disagrees with Hanania ben Gamliel, because it keeps a very clear distinction between human punishment and heavenly punishment. So now the Gemara rejects the proof.
The Gemara rejects this proof. Rav Nachman said, whose opinion is this in our Mishnah? It is that of Rav Yitzhak, who says there is no penalty of lashes for those who are liable to karet, as it was taught in a Baraita. Rav Yitzhak says all forbidden unions that bear karet penalties were included in the Torah's general statement: whoever commits any of these abominations will incur karet. Why then is karet singled out for mention in the case of one who cohabited with his sister, to judge it with karet and not with lashes? And by extension, we derive that all karet-bearing sins carry that penalty exclusively and not the penalty of lashes. Accordingly, our Mishnah assigns karet to the deliberate violation of Yom Kippur because it holds that lashes are not incurred for such a sin. But would lashes indeed be incurred for karet sins, the sinner would be absolved from karet by receiving lashes, as Rav Hanania ben Gamliel holds.
Okay. So what the Gemara now says is there's a whole fight about whether there are multiple punishments with regard to these infractions. There are many, many sins in the Torah that have been labeled as sins that make you liable for karet. So Rabbi Yitzchak says there is, though in general, when you transgress a prohibition in the Torah, the general rule is that you get lashes. That if you are warned by witnesses not to do it, and you say, I don't care, I'm doing it on purpose anyway, and I know that I'm going to get lashes, nevertheless, I'm doing it, then you will get the punishment of lashes. So what Rabbi Yitzchak says, when the Torah explicitly tells us that you're going to get karet, the Torah is telling us that because the Torah is telling us that you're getting karet and you're not going to get lashes. So when Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel says that if you get lashes in a karet case, that'll be good enough, Rabbi Yitzchak says you can't get lashes in a karet case because that's not, it's just off the table completely. So therefore, and the examples that he's giving are examples of incest. Committing incest is a prohibition. Will you get lashes if you commit incest? The answer is no, you'll just be given karet. So if you look at note 39, okay, you got it, Beryl?
Even if he was warned by witnesses before he committed the act, he does not incur the penalty of flogging, but only karet. Rashi, although the Torah...
That's all, right? So even though the witnesses have told him point blank, do not do this, this is a no-no, we do not give any punishment from the court, it's karet, it's up to God. So this again touches back to this whole tension that we have of where does God intervene and where do we intervene? And we have here, a difference of opinion. So with Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel, he's saying, let's forget about incest. What about Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur, you could get lashes instead, but not. So I'll say that, and that Rabbi Yitzchak could be right with regard to incest violations, but when it comes to violating Yom Kippur, we can get away with lashes, and the person won't get karet. Now, what the Gemara here says is maybe this is not. This is Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion that even Yom Kippur does not have lashes. But theoretically, if we could have lashes, then you would get exempted from karet. Where would this come up? Perhaps this might come up, and this is a whole long discussion, which we only have we're going to just glide right over it, but just mention it. What if the court administered lashes anyway? What if the court decided, for whatever reason, sociological reasons, what we have in the responsa literature, we have people who come to the rabbis and say, I am so abjectly miserable about what I have done. I need some kind of atonement. Help me. And the rabbis then have a whole conflict. What do we say? Sorry, buddy, it's between you and God. We can't help you out. And the person says, impose upon me some regimen of repentance. Make me have to suffer so that I can feel that my sin is expiated. There's, like I said, there are discussions in the rabbinic literature, and I'm just giving you a very, very too brief and superficial summary, but there are opinions that if the court does it out of the quote-unquote goodness of their heart and administers lashes to this person to make them quote-unquote feel better, those lashes will count as an absolution from karet. Let's continue with the last paragraph about that which is somewhat related.
The Gemara now offers another way to reconcile our Mishnah with the opinion of Rav Hanania ben Gamliel. Rav Ashi said, "You can even say that our Mishnah follows the rabbis who hold that lashes are incurred for karet-bearing sins, and still it could be accord with Rav Hanania ben Gamliel's opinion that lashes absolve the sinner from karet. For the distinction drawn by our Mishnah between the Sabbath and Yom Kippur can be explained as follows. In this case, the Sabbath, the main punishment for deliberate desecration is punishable by human authority, and in the other case, Yom Kippur, the main punishment for deliberate desecration is with karet."
Okay, so that's their final statement. In other words, we're not talking about what might happen in a particular case. We're talking about the overall principle. The overall principle is that the Torah mandates the death penalty administered by a human court with regard to infractions from Shabbat. And the Torah mandates karet, which is a punishment from heaven, with regard to a transgression of Yom Kippur. Now, yes, it's still possible to think about cases where the person who violates Yom Kippur will get lashes. That could happen, but that's not the main point. That's not the main thrust of what the Torah says. In those exceptional cases, or in those cases where such a punishment is administered, then yes, then the radical statement of Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel applies, that the courtly punishment preempts and erases the heavenly punishment. But it doesn't necessarily happen. The main point is that God has put in God's own expression of displeasure by saying, I will definitely see to it that this person is punished. And now in that case, what Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel is saying is that in this bizarre way, we're actually, as I say, subverting God's intent. And instead of the principle which we usually have, let the person be punished by the greatest punishment that can happen, and all other punishments are left on by the wayside. For instance, if you're going to get killed, that's a greater punishment than paying $50 for ripping somebody's jacket. So you don't pay the $50, you just get killed. But here we're doing it the opposite in a certain way, right? What we're saying is, you know what, if the court administers physical punishment, corporal punishment, that suffering is good enough, and God will just have to be satisfied and not administer karet. So we have a swinging back and forth between these two poles of where we're supposed to be in terms of administering God's justice. All right, any last comments before we go to the next Mishnah? Okay, so now we're on 8a1. Hopefully everybody has that text. And we're going to a completely different subject, because each of these Mishnayot, the only thing that ties them together is that structural phraseology. There's no difference between A and B except X. Right? That's the common denominator. The topics are always different. The A is always different, the B is always different, and the X is always different. So now we're at 8a1. Beryl, you got it?
Mishnah. There is no difference between someone prohibited by a vow to benefit from another and someone prohibited by a vow to derive food-related benefit from him, except for setting foot on his property and using utensils with which people do not prepare food.
Okay, that's it. Clear as a bell. So we have to understand the overall subject here, and the overall subject, the word in Hebrew is that's being used is ein ben mudar hana'a le mudar mimenu, etc. The word mudar means someone who has a vow directed at them. So they're actually the object of somebody else taking a vow against them, right? So the scenario could be I have a fight with Yankel Schmerel, and I say, you know, you are such a terrible person, I can't stand you anymore. You cannot benefit from anything of mine. Nothing that I have, you can't have any benefit from anything of mine. So obviously, what I have is mine, and I have a you know, the power to control what I have. So if I say that, then you have to keep away from everything of mine. You can't derive any benefit from anything of mine. But you might have a fight with somebody, and it could be a little more specified or limited, and the person will say something like, okay, from now, you're not going to ever be able to, I'm never going to allow you to eat anything of mine. I'm never going to allow you to have any benefit from any of my food. Right? Let's say you've always been, you know, lunch buddies or something like that, and you get into a big fight, and then the food becomes the big focus. So what's the difference between a person who's completely debarred by that vow from having any benefits from me, from the person who is debarred in the case of enjoying some food stuff? But let's just get a little bit more about that on note number 1.
This Mishnah also appears in Nedarim.
Nedarim. Nedarim is plural of neder, and neder is a vow. Okay? So we say, for instance, we sometimes say, you have a phrase, bli neder, right? Which means, yes, I'll see you tomorrow at 5 o'clock, bli neder. It means I'm not making a vow, I'm not making a solid promise here that I can't get out of, but I intend to go, you know, and meet my obligation. We have it also. Some people. Has anybody ever heard of a schnutter? Schnuttering? Well, if you never heard of it, I don't have to explain it. No, schnuttering, Jen. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead with your explanation. I just wanted to ask: is this still a going thing? Can I take one of these vows against my cousin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With my full encouragement. Without knowing a thing, I'm with you. So
thank you.
Okay, just kidding. So schnuttering is making a pledge. In the old days, you would get an aliyah, and the idea was when you get called to the Torah, that's how the shul would make its budget, and you would be allowed to have the aliyah, the honor, ba'avur shenadar, because the person pledged to make a donation to the shul. So shenadar in Yiddish became shnodar, and then the whole process of you know, putting things up for sale became schnuttering. So shenadar, that they made the pledge. You know, because they made that pledge, that's why we're giving them this honor. Okay, so first Sylvia, then Jerilyn. You have to unmute.
As an aside, as I understand it, in the old days, Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in New York, they may still do it, I don't know. On Kol Nidre night, the people who were called up for an aliyah announced...
Wait, let me stop you. Just Kol Nidre. The word Nidre is neder. all vows.
Good, good, okay. So they were called up and announced their nidra, or whatever the singular is,
Neder.
in Hebrew, the numbers in Hebrew. And it was my understanding that some members of the congregation didn't understand a word of Hebrew except for the numbers, so they knew what people were giving.
Right. This is the Yom Kippur appeal idea.
Right.
Jerilyn.
I remember when I was a little girl, we always went for stay at my grandpa's house in Jersey City for Kol Nidre and for all of Yom Kippur. And I remember as a little girl them schnuddering. Yes, I remember the word. And my grandpa always bargained, okay, to stand, always to stand for Neela. And once in a while, somebody would bargain against him, but he always won. He always stood for Neela.
All right.
Yes, I do remember when I was a little girl.
Right. Okay. I just want to, before Josie, I want to just point out, we don't have that as an active part of every service that we do. However, you should understand that when people are asked to pledge, our sustaining share model is based on people making a vow, and the assumption that they're going to take that vow seriously. Yeah, Josie.
When I worked in the fundraising department for the big Jewish charities in New York, there was a big argument about should we have people get up and announce their gift, and thereby, if you want to look more important than Chaim, you would pledge more, or was it undignified and not the proper way to do things? And all the people involved in fundraising said, no, it's a great way to raise money because it comes from a feeling of, I want to be as important as so-and-so.
Right, and it creates peer pressure.
Yeah, a
Well,
lot.
And competition.
As
It was a bartering. It was like bartering. Yeah.
I want to just put out, taking a pledge doesn't have to be a public act. If you make your own pledge by yourself, that's still equally binding. Yes, Sylvia.
Yeah, just to follow up on Josie's comment, right here at Federation in Metro West, until maybe 15 years ago, or maybe even less, all pledges were open in public. And then it was decided not to do it that way.
Okay, so like the sociological pressures or advantages or disadvantages of public pledging are one thing. The legal obligation, as far as the Torah is concerned, of standing by the word is independent, right? Okay, so now thank you, Beryl. Now back to you.
Am I reading number one, or am I back up on top?
Yeah, back to, yeah. I interrupted. Go ahead.
Okay. The Torah states, if a man makes a vow to Hashem or makes an oath to take a prohibition upon himself, he should not profane his word. According to whatever proceeds from his mouth, he shall do. This means that through a vow, a person can prohibit himself from deriving benefit from an object. Similarly, the owner of an object can prohibit someone else from benefiting from his object. The degree to which benefit becomes forbidden depends on the degree specified in the vow. The person to whom the benefit of an object has been forbidden through a vow is called
Mudar Hana'ah.
one whose benefit has been prohibited by a vow.
So again, a vow can be a positive commitment. I promise to pay the shul X number of dollars. I promise to head that committee, whatever it is. But a vow can also be to prohibit something. People sometimes do that. I eat too much chocolate. I'm going to make a vow that chocolate will never pass my lips ever again. And then that's a prohibition on that bar of chocolate that's sitting right in front of you. That's what in a certain sense, that's what a Nazirite does with wine and grape products. They're making a vow so as to prohibit those things from being enjoyed by him or her. But now we're saying, what happens if I do it to prohibit you from getting any benefit from what I have. So you can't do that. You're not putting any kind of whammy on the person, but you are basically verbally not giving permission to that person to ever touch, use, benefit from your stuff. And that is within your rights. So now the question that the Mishnah brings up is, what happens with two such similar vows, and yet there's a difference between them, right? So one is a total vow and no benefit of anything of mine at all. And the other is, I vow that you can't have any food benefit from me. So when we say food benefit, how far does that extend? Where does it not quite meet up to total prohibition? So the answer is, the Mishnah, except for setting foot on his property, and we'll get to the next one. In other words, if I say to you, I am hereby prohibiting anything of mine from your benefit, so that includes even my property. You can't have any benefit of using my property, which means even going onto my property, right? It's a benefit. If you jump into the air, it's a benefit to have some ground under your feet to come back down on. So you're not allowed to trespass on my property. You're not allowed to come onto my property at all, right? Even though the benefit is so negligible and intangible, nevertheless, if it's my property, you can't have any use of it whatsoever. If I say you can't have any food benefit from me, then walking onto my property would be allowed. So that's one example. Then the Mishnah gives another example. The other is using utensils with which people do not prepare food. Okay? So this means that what about utensils that you do prepare food with? That's included in the total prohibition. So that's included in the food prohibition. When I say you can't have any food benefit from me, then I'm not going to give you my frying pan, because that's going to be for you to cook food in. Forget about it. You can't. But if we're talking about my lawnmower, then that you can use, because the lawnmower is just to have a different kind of benefit, just to cut the grass, right? If I say I'm prohibiting any food benefit from you, I'm not going to let you use my Cuisinart. So it's not just the carrot that you're not allowed to eat of mine, but you're not allowed to have any food-related benefit from me. But a utensil which people do not use to prepare food, any other tools, that a hammer, if I had a hammer, I can lend it to you. Right? You can borrow it from me. Okay, so this is, but as a result, we're learning this extra extension that the food is not simply the chewable food. It's also food preparation stuff as well. Okay, yes, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of lost here. I understand what it means to say, I make a vow to give money to the shul. I make a vow to not eat chocolate anymore. But I don't understand really what kind of vows we're talking about here. Are we saying I'm having a dispute with my neighbor, you're forbidden from coming onto my property, or I own a restaurant and you're misbehaving in my restaurant, you're forbidden from coming into my restaurant and eating there.
Okay.
So if I forbid you from eating in my restaurant, it doesn't mean that you're forbidden from coming onto my property. You can still come onto my property, you just can't eat my food. But
Right.
if I forbid you from having any benefit from anything that I own, whether it's my property or my food or my car, that's a more categorical kind of prohibition. That's the distinction
Right.
that we're drawing.
Anything-
The narrow prohibition versus the
Yeah.
okay.
So,
So
I
the
mean,
question,
you stated it pretty clearly. The point is that I have a right to do that. I have the power to debar you from any use of anything that I have. And then with regard to the second, more limited prohibition that I created, nevertheless, it extends not just to literal food, but to any kind of food processing.
Okay.
That's what we have here.
So I know somebody who, you know, I've invited to my house on so many occasions to eat, and the person never reciprocates. So I say, forget it. You're not welcome in my house anymore. I'm not going to feed you any more food. That extends to not only can you not eat in my house, but you're also not going to be, forget about using my Calphalon pan or something like that, or my serving utensils.
Well, if you say you can't have any food benefit from me, then you don't have to specify the utensil.
Right.
Be included. But what I want to point out again is it all has to be in the context of, and that's the whole tractate of Nedarim. The formulation is important. The formulation has to be in the form of a vow, of an oath. You can't be, I'm really angry at you. You're such a disgusting person. Look at all the times I've been nice to you and you're not nice to me. Get away from me.
But are we really supposed to be making vows about matters of this sort? I mean, aren't vows meant to be
meant to be avoided? However, if they are spoken, they are binding. That's the tension. Yeah, Sylvia, you wanted to say something.
What about written vows? But that's the next step. No, I was reading this from the point of view that this was written in a very agricultural world where not everybody had a field in which to grow food. And you could deny, on the basis of being angry, you could deny sustenance to people.
Well, I don't think
they weren't allowed to have anything from your fields.
It's not just about fields. It's about what, it could be neighbors. The proverbial going over to your neighbor to borrow a cup of sugar. It could be, with Stuart's example, a friend. That,
I understand.
How many times have I picked up the tab, and you never do? Forget it. It's over. So it doesn't have to be. The scenarios are infinite. There are 8 million stories in the naked city of people taking vows against the other person. So, but what the Torah says, and what the rabbis then investigated, was if we take the power of words seriously, and we take the obligation to stand by your words seriously, then what sense do we make of the different things that people say? And the tractate of Nedarim goes through all kinds of things. What if you say something, in the heat of the moment? Do you really mean it? Do you not mean it? What if you use really bizarre language? All of these things are part of the idea of treating language as powerful and as sacrosanct, and therefore trying to make sense of every kind of situation. Okay, yeah, Jen.
So I take it this has to be a public vow to a certain degree if you're taking these, because the other person needs to know that you took them.
Right.
Was there any process?
Public, at least to the other person.
At least, okay. So it only had to be to the other person. There was no real process by which there was like any bet din to mediate this beforehand. You can just go ahead and do it.
Right. Where the beit din might come in is investigating what the ins and outs are of this if you wanted to get out of it. Or if the other person was guilty of an infraction and was claiming innocence or whatever, or if you wanted to to say this person has trespassed, or something like that. That's when the beit din comes. The beit din comes in afterwards, but you don't have to go to a beit din to make a vow. The problem is actually when you go to a beit din to make a vow, then it's harder to nullify.
Okay, but so this isn't something you can nullify just by saying we're okay again? You can't just nullify it yourself between you and this other person?
That's what I'm saying. That's the power of the language. Once you have put those words out of your mouth, they take on a meaning and a validity that you cannot just, with the snap of your fingers, say, I don't care. But then you have to come back to the beit din and say, I regret it. Had I known the following, it was blah, blah, blah. I want to, please, let the words have take on a life of their own. right? And in a certain sense, it's like any creative act. Saying these words is a creative act. If I write a novel, once it's out there, I can't simply erase it.
It's like your Twitter feed. It's never really gone. Yeah.
Once you put it out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. So now the Gemara talks about a couple of other wrinkles in this whole thing, as usual. Okay. So Gemara.
The Mishnah states that the sole differences between one prohibited from all benefit and one prohibited from food benefit are the permit to pass through the dower's property and to use his non-food related utensils. The Gemara deduces. But with regard to utensils with which people prepare food, both this, one prohibited from all benefit, and this, one prohibited from food-related benefits, are identical in being forbidden to benefit from such utensils.
Okay, so that's what I said before, right? This is the extension that we deduce from here, that even though I say food, it's related to all food preparation as well. Okay, there's a couple of notes here that deal with another kind of deeper digging into this thing. And that is, what exactly is the benefit? What's the benefit that a person gets that I am precluding, that I am prohibiting? What is it that if I lend you my frying pan, right? What benefit has that person gotten by holding on to my frying pan? Right? So if you look at number 5.
The Mishnah refers to places where such utensils are not rented, but lent gratis. One prohibited to derive food-related benefit may borrow these utensils from the vower, since their use involves no food-related benefit. But one prohibited from all benefit may not borrow them, for he does in fact derive benefit from their use. However, in a place where such items are rented, even one prohibited from food-related benefit may not borrow them, for by borrowing them, he has saved the cost of rental, which is considered a food-related benefit since the savings can be used to acquire food.
Okay, so here we're getting into some subtle economics. Right? What the Gemara is saying is, what the notes are saying, and based on other Talmudic discussion, what's the situation in general? What's the social norm? Do people lend these objects just like that? Or are we talking about that it has to be actually tangibly paid for? Right? So are you benefiting by the fact that if this person gives you the utensil, I saved money? Or is it even when people do this all the time? So the deduction that we have is that our Mishnah is not only talking about the money situation, it's talking about a regular situation. Even when people lend things just like that, the fact that I am being lent an object is a benefit. I don't have the object unless I get it lent to me. Right? What other benefit might there be? What other benefit is there when there's no bottom line involved? Right? There's no economic, in the red or in the black situation. It's just simply, you asked me for the hoe, you asked me for the pot, and I lend it to you. What benefit is there then? There's something called social capital. Right? There's the benefit of the interpersonal relationship being made easier, right? Which is actually exactly what's at issue with this particular person, right? This particular person says, I don't want to have a good, smooth social relationship with you. an interpersonal relationship with you. So even though there's no money, benefit doesn't just reduce to money. Benefit is the fact that we work together in a society where, you know, one person is there for the other. So that's the first part of this. The second part of this note is that when there is money, when it actually becomes explicit, that we're not just being nice to each other and it's a social situation that we want to just keep people not fighting with each other and not hitting people over the head, when it's actually really, I'm only doing this if you pay me money, then the saving of money is not simply saving of money. Saving of money is food. Food means more than just the carrot that you're chewing. Food means sustenance. So food means if I can save $5 here, then I can buy with that $5 food to feed my family. So that kind of idea is not, I wouldn't say it's not, you know, Sylvia was saying, what kind of social context are we talking about? It's not necessarily agricultural, but it's really about a kind of a more of a subsistence concept, right? People that have a very limited budget, every dollar that goes to this doesn't go to something else, right? If I have to pay my rent with half of my money, I'm going to skimp on what I'm going to put on the dinner table. So that's where this point says we're going to count it as a food benefit if the person lends you the object instead of charging you rent. It's not just money, it's food, right? It's much more tangible, it's much more basic. Okay. Anybody else wanted to say something about that? Okay. So now we go to
Rabbi?
yes, where
I
are
do
you?
have a thought.
Oh, David.
Anything you lend somebody instead of renting, even the lawnmower, results in a saving in that.
Right.
That's right.
That could be
Yeah.
substituted for food.
You have to rent it from somebody else.
Right.
If he doesn't rent it from me, he's going to have to
So
rent it
that's what I
from
said.
the.
If it's a
Or buy
rental
it.
issue, then it's always considered food. But if there are places where people do these kinds of favors for each other without rental fees, then it depends if it's food or not. Right?
Always be
Yes,
converted. to food.
anytime that you're saving money, anytime you're saving money, that's food. So in
Right.
any situation where people normally lend these utensils only, they don't lend it, they rent it, and this time they're lending it, then that's a food benefit. But if you live in a community where it's always understood and that are you kidding? These kinds of things, it would be crass to rent it out. Everybody borrows everybody's lawnmower.
Right.
You know,
But
then,
then-
in such a
but
case, then in such a case, it's a benefit, pure and simple. It's not a food benefit.
Yes, but on a societal level, if you have a bartering world, then I give to you, you give to me, it all evens out.
That's why the Gemara, that's why the Mishnah is saying, no, but there are distinctions. If you're making an explicit distinction by saying, I don't want you to benefit from me with regard to food, you could have said, I don't want you to have anything to do with me. You're never going to be able to use anything of mine whatsoever. Then clearly, yes, you can't have the lawnmower, and you can't stand on my property even to smoke a cigarette, and you can't do, you're out, period. But if you yourself limited your prohibition and said it's with regard to any food-related items, that's what you can't benefit from, then we extend the food concept to a certain point, but there has to be like an event diagram. There has to be a place that's not going to overlap with the total prohibition. Right? So where do we find that open space? That's the question. Jennifer.
Are these like pre-made up vows that you take, or can you do one yourself? Like, you will never benefit from my Netflix subscription, and that's like, can you just do that? And like, and does everybody have their?
Who's this, for your niece or your cousin?
No, my niece. No, never for my nieces. They're golden. No, it's my horrible cousin. No, and who's not really that horrible. I'm only kidding.
Yes,
But
you can be as
yes, if
specific
you
as you
want to make
want.
a very specific vow, can you do that?
Yes, that's whatever it is that you end up formulating, it's on you. You can do it. I mean, if it's within your control, if the Netflix is your subscription, what you can't prohibit somebody else's stuff, right? You can't prohibit that person from using their Netflix subscription, or you can't prohibit somebody from using your niece's Netflix subscription, right? So only what you own, right? Okay. All right, a little bit further. We're back now into the Gemara. The last lines on the left-hand side of this Gemara discussion before the Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah.
Our Mishnah stated that the one prohibited from all benefit is prohibited from setting foot on the vower's property. The Gemara asks, but people do not care if others pass through their property. Why then should such passage be construed as a benefit, that it should be forbidden to one prohibited from benefit?
Okay, so here the Gemara says, let's get real. Nobody cares if you take a shortcut through my backyard to get to to the train station. At least, obviously, in places where that's the case, and that's what the Gemara is really saying. If we're talking about places where people are free and easy, with people, quote unquote, trespassing on their property and walking through it, then in what sense is there something that I have benefited that I could be prohibited from enjoying? Right, going back even to the social capital idea, right? If I don't care, then I'm not paying any attention. I don't even know when you're going through my property. Then in what sense is there any kind of real positive interaction that you're benefiting from? So what does the Gemara answer?
The Gemara answers, Rava said, whose opinion is reflected in this ruling of our Mishnah? The opinion of Rav Eliezer, who says that even gratuities are forbidden to one prohibited by vow from benefit.
Okay, so that's the end of our discussion. So this person, Rabbi Eliezer, says vitur. Vitur means relinquishing, not caring, right? Not paying any attention to something. So Rabbi Eliezer says no. Even though you can live in a social situation where people supposedly don't care about this or that or the other thing, but underlying that don't caring is a caring. Right? Underlying that don't caring, that not caring, is a sense of a social bond, a fabric that people benefit from. And when you're benefiting from, when you're making use of what that other person doesn't care about other people making use of it, you're benefiting from being included in that kind of taken for granted, quiet, easy, tranquil environment. And therefore, if that person has explicitly made an oath prohibiting you from enjoying any benefit from me, then even though in general I don't care what people do on my, walking through my property, but I have explicitly excluded you from that. Even though in general I don't pay any attention to anybody else. It doesn't have to be conscious. It doesn't have to be explicit. Let's look at note 8.
Gratuities here refers to the premium that a vendor commonly adds gratis to the amount specified by the customer. A vendor may not give this to a customer he has prohibited to benefit from him. Though the vendor adds this amount gratis to every customer, it is still considered a benefit from which the vower has prohibited this particular person. Similarly, Rav Eliezer would hold that passage through someone's property is also considered an enjoyment of benefit, even though such benefit is made freely available to all. The sages, however, disagree with Rav Eliezer and hold that a benefit that owners do not care about and freely bestow on all is not a benefit that is forbidden to one prohibited from benefit.
Okay. So the example that the note gives at the beginning is the idea that whenever, let's say, you know, buy a pound of flour in the store and it's weighed out, so it's always taken for granted that the vendor, the person who's selling you the flour, is going to fill up the scale and just give a tiny bit more, right? Just for good measure, right? Literally, that's what for good measure means, right? That's what they always do. That's what they always do. So what the disagreement between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer is, in such cases, that's the social convention. Everybody does this, and that's without even thinking. That's what good business practices are. That's what everybody takes for granted. Nevertheless, says Rabbi Eliezer, if I have been singled out by this person and prohibited to benefit from that person, then even this conventional, universal practice has been taken away from me. And I will not be able to actually get that extra zillionth of an ounce of flour from that person. It's prohibited to me, and I can't eat it, right? So that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. And the rabbis say, no. The rabbis say, if this is so conventionalized, if this is such a universal practice, then it doesn't get included. So what would we try to, what could we say about this in a more maybe conceptual way? What's the disagreement between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer? What do they see differently, and therefore come to this ruling? It's never about just this particular detail of a rule, right? It's not that Rabbi Eliezer just wants to keep a zillionth of an ounce away from the other person, and the rabbis say, what the heck? There's a conceptual distinction that's being made by one that's not being accepted by the other, or vice versa.
I think it's how the person who's giving the benefit understands it. If they understand it, let me just make sure I understand. If I make a vow that you're not going to benefit from anything of mine, I can still sell you something, right? I just can't give it to you. So the question is, if it's just a transaction, a quid pro quo transaction, one for one, then I'm not violating the vow because it's not covered by the vow. But the question is what my understanding of it is. Do I view this as, do I understand it as I'm just giving you what you're paying for, or do I understand it as giving you something more than what you're paying for?
Right. So good. So this is a useful kind of set of a setup and the question that you're asking. First of all, do we really think that it all depends on what the person means? If we think that it depends on what the person means, we should ask them. Is that what you meant? Did you mean to not let them come on your property? No, I didn't mean that. I just meant them that they can't use, all the stuff in my tool shed that they always come into and use, right? What the Gemara, the Talmud, the whole rabbinic system, this whole business of exploring the Darim, going back to what I said before, once the formulation is uttered, it flies away from your own intention. It takes on its own independent meaning. And since it takes its own independent meaning, we can't ask you anymore, what did you mean? In certain cases, there will be time, what did you mean by that? But if there is a formulation, as we have here, standard formulations that people take, you filled out the form, so to speak. If you filled out the form, it doesn't matter whether you had reservations about the fine print or not. It's on there. So if you have excluded this person officially from having any benefit from anything of yours, then you are then bound by the same rules as everybody else. This is an official use of language, and it's a dictionary definition, so to speak, which you can't change. So that's the struggle here. At the same time, let's take your example, right? I am allowed, everybody agrees, I'm allowed to sell you a pound of flour, right? So that interchange between me and you is not considered an issue of benefit. Because like you say, quid pro quo, there's a complete evening out of you gave me this, I gave you that, nobody benefited. See, we don't think about what I was saying before, the social interaction, how it's good to have commerce, it's good to do business and so on and so forth. That's good for everybody. That's healthier for everybody. But once we add that little extra half an ounce of flour to the deal, then all of a sudden we're saying, no, that becomes a question of benefit, right? Because that's where society itself recognizes that everything can't be so quantified. Everything can't only be, accounted for on the plus column and on the minus column, right? The famous distinction, of Martin Buber on interpersonal interaction. I thou, I it, right? Is this completely transactional without any kind of real recognition of our connected humanity, or is there something more? So even in society, there's this kind of push to keep things a little bit more human, a little softer. And then you have this question that of Rabbi Eliezer versus the rabbis. Let me give it a different example. Pirkei Avot, in the fundamental ethical teachings of the rabbis, we have a place where the rabbis say different people have different ideas about property. And some people say what's mine is mine and what yours is mine. So watch out for that person, right? Then you have somebody who says what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. So that's a super generous person, maybe to a fault, maybe even a little, too generous, but definitely generous. And then you have the person who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. And the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, some people say that this is the average idea. Zo midah beinonit. This is, it's not bad, it's not good, it's fine. And then v'yesh omrim zo midat Sodom. And some people say, are you kidding? This is what Sodom was based on. This is what the evil society of Sodom was based on, was to cut this so thin. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and never the twain shall meet. So what's called here gratuities, vitur, is what's understood to be when society doesn't want that to be this hard-nosed kind of distinction. You're going to pay me $5 for a pound of flour. I'm not going to give you just a pound of flour and not 1 grain more. I'm going to give you a little bit more. What do you think? I'm not a human being? I don't think you are a human being? It's a softening of that, right? So that question now becomes, where in this social dynamic are these two people? These two people who are not getting along. Certainly one of them is really, really angry at the other person, is really negative toward the other person. So what the Rabbi Eliezer says is, in that case, that person has singled out their antagonist and cut them out of the social contract, so to speak. I'm misusing that term here, but doesn't matter. That whole web of softening up that we've created, that's exactly what I have done. I've created this negativity that puts a hard and fast line between us. And the rabbis say, wait, it's one thing if it's conscious. It's one thing if it's something that somebody cares about. But if this is a universal way of being, where everybody doesn't even pay any attention, we always know that that's it. You top off a little bit more on the flour. Then the fact that I'm having a fight with you cannot rip apart the whole web that we have created in society itself. We can't then say, no, then you as the vendor have to all of a sudden stop yourself and not act as you always have been acting and treat this person in a completely different way. That would go too far. And I think that we can see both sides. These are questions of how intricately and how richly do we want to embed people into the society, and how easily we want to be able to let people in society call out the other person and separate them. Right? And if that's, again, coming back to what I said before to Stuart, that's why it's not about the individual's intent. We are trying to create a system of social life that both gives, a place for people to get along, but also gives people some power to be independent operators and to have their own autonomy. We want to respect that autonomy. How much do we respect that autonomy at the cost of creating a much more individualized society? That's the fight.
I have a story that's very apropos.
Good.
On Friday morning, I went to buy bagels at the bagel shop, which I don't usually go to. It's the bagel shop that I usually never set foot in. But
it's like shuls. It's like the two shuls, right?
right. And I went there and I ordered my dozen bagels in my particular configuration, and then the woman behind the counter said, "What do you want for your 13th bagel?" So I told her, and I got the jalapeno, which I never ordered except as the 13th, because it's too frivolous. But I got it, and then I got home, and I put I usually cut them, and then I put them in the freezer and keep a few out. I realized that there were only 12 bagels in the bag, and I felt very aggrieved, and remembered why I don't usually go to this bagel shop. So was it a mistake? Was it intentional? I don't know, but it was pretty disturbing. So I don't know.
Right. Is that very?
Did you get over it?
How that worked out in your mind? It's supposed to be a freebie.
Right.
So you're not really entitled to it.
Right.
And you expect it.
Right.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, he was also missing one that he wanted then.
Well, I got the jalapeno, but I didn't get the the whole wheat or whatever it was.
That's
Missing
right.
one he wanted.
There you go. There you go. Ay vey. Ay vey. All right. I think you should write that into Metropolitan Diary. That's what I think you should do. All right. We're going to stop here. I want to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah and enjoy. This evening you can tune in. We're going to have if you haven't picked up your bag, come pick up your bag from the front of the show. And tonight we'll have a donut decorating contest, and then we're going to have Zoom Hanukkah lighting for everybody together. So, okay, Zag isn't everybody.
Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Chagarim Sameach. Stay safe, everyone.
Sameach.